All right, so this past season, I grew by a landslide my largest, hugest heads of garlic. And so what I want to walk through today are 5 changes that I made from previous seasons to this one to help me grow those beautiful heads of garlic, and the one change that I'm going to be making for this upcoming season. First big change that I made this past season was the location of where I planted the garlic. And right here, this is where I planted my garlic the previous season. And that was my first year living at this house. And what I didn't realize at that time was that this area right here is the shadiest part of my entire garden and growing space, which is why you now see kale in it behind me, which requires less light than garlic. And so what I did for this past season, where I got much larger heads of garlic, was I moved the garlic into the next bed over, which, with how my house is positioned, is one of the sunniest beds that I actually have. So just a small change of about 10 feet made a huge difference in growing much larger heads of garlic. And I would encourage you to really think through the location in your garden that you're going to be planting your garlic to ensure that it gets lots of sunlight. So why am I sitting right beside a big pile of compost? Well, that's because the second big change that I made for this past season was that I added 1 to 2 inches of beautiful, delicious, and nutritious, full of nutrient compost at the point of planting the garlic in October. Now, when we think about previous seasons, I literally just put the garlic into the ground, and the challenge with that is that those garden beds that I was growing out of, they had been producing for me over the course of the spring, over the course of the summer, and into the fall. And so they were likely completely empty of nutrients by the time that I put the garlic into it. And so by adding 1 to 2 inches of compost, it ensured that there was a fresh round of nutrients and microbes in that soil for the garlic to have some nutrition as it went into the winter time. And so my big encouragement for you on this front is that before you get that garlic into the ground, spend a minute or two just to slow down and to get some new fresh compost into those beds to continue to build your soil ecosystem. Okay, so the third change that I made this past season was that when I planted each of the garlic cloves, in each and every one of the holes that I was putting the clove into, I put about half a handful of our worm castings into the bottom of those holes. And this is once again giving it that really, really desirable environment for it to have everything that it needs from a nutrition and a microbial perspective to be establishing beneath the surface. And this is all really mild on the nutrition front. So when we think about compost and the worm castings, we're not looking at any wild amounts of nitrogen or phosphorus or potassium, but rather just enough to establish. Because what we don't want is for our garlic baby to be putting on growth before the winter, where it would then have some challenge with that new growth that's above the surface. But we do want it to have the nutrients and the microbes so that beneath the surface it's able to begin to establish. And so my encouragement for you would be to utilize some worm castings in each and every one of those holes. And if you would like to utilize our worm castings, there's a link in the description down below where you're able to purchase our growth kit, which also comes with our superfood, which we're going to talk about in just a few steps from now. So why am I sitting in my front yard, and what does that have to do with growing garlic? Well, the fourth change that I made this past season was that when I planted those cloves of garlic with the worm castings and the compost, the last thing that I did before kind of ending things for the fall and into the winter was that I took 2 to 3 inches of leaves and I put that as a leaf mulch over top of the garden beds. And so in previous seasons I had just put the garlic cloves into the ground, and I did not do anything when it came to covering them or providing a little bit more warmth. But this past season I took those 2 to 3 inches of leaves, put them over top, and what that was doing was creating just a little bit more of a barrier between those really cold winter temperatures and where the garlic was trying to establish beneath the surface, without adding on a whole bunch more weight that it would then have to push through and grow through. So my encouragement to you would be to spend an afternoon kind of driving around in your neighborhood and just raking up a whole bunch of leaves that you're finding on the side of the road that have fallen onto the ground. Bring those back to your place and put 2 to 3 inches over top of that garlic bed, and do that as the last thing in terms of preparing your garlic to go into dormancy over the course of the winter. Okay, so the 5th change that I made this past season was that once we made it through the winter and I noticed that the plants were starting to grow and the days were getting a little bit longer and the temperatures were getting a little bit warmer, I applied both at the beginning of March and at the beginning of May our 444, there it is, that side, 444 Superfood. And what this is doing is it's giving those plant babies, those little garlic babies, all of the nutrients that they need to now capitalize on the warmer temperatures and the longer days that we're coming into. And so in the previous seasons, I once again had just allowed them to grow, but this year I was actively feeding them with that superfood. And so all that I did was I grabbed about 1 to 2 tablespoons at the base of each plant, and then I massaged that in, and then I watered it nice and thoroughly to ensure that those nutrients were making their way down into the soil so that the plant could put them to use and grow really, really nice and big and strong and make the most, again, of those warmer days and longer days. Okay, so just before I share the one change that I'm going to make for this coming season here, if you've gotten any entertainment or value, if you're feeling more comfortable and confident and excited to be growing garlic this coming season, please go ahead and give us a like or a comment. That really helps us get in front of new gardeners who may not have yet experienced gardening's mental health benefits. So the one change I'm going to make this season is that I was chatting with one of the growers in our community who's had tons of success with growing garlic. And what he does every season is he puts aside the biggest heads of garlic to then use the cloves of those when he plants for the upcoming season. And so what I've done here is that I have put aside the biggest cloves from this past season that I grew, and these are the ones that I'm not going to be using in the kitchen, but rather in mid-October I'm going to be taking the cloves from these and putting them into the beds. And my hopes here is that the cloves that are going into the beds are the biggest, the best, with the best genetics, and therefore are going to yield even bigger heads of garlic, just as that individual in our community has seen over the years ahead. And take a look at just the size of these 2 cloves alone. They're absolutely, absolutely large. And so I'm really, really curious to see this coming season how that has and what kind of impact that has on the overall crop size. So that's everything that I wanted to cover off on for today. I really hope that this has helped you feel more comfortable and confident and excited for the season ahead. Any questions that you have, drop those down into the comments. I love chatting about all things garlic, so I'll be sure to answer any questions that do come through. Go get those hands dirty, and I can't wait to catch you on the next one. See you then.